So, I just got to see the brand new film from writer-director Luca Guadagnino, the same guy that directed most recently Challengers, one of my favorite movies of the year. Yeah, he's coming with double action, 2 movies in 1 year. It's pretty impressive, granted that most directors, it takes them like 3-4 years to make 1 movie, or in the case of James Cameron, about 10 years, 15 years sometimes in between his films. Jimmy, work a little faster. So Queer is another film in his filmography that studies the love between 2 characters. All of his films are really about relationships, with Challengers being about Zendaya and the 2 dudes that she plays tennis with, essentially. Obviously, it's a lot deeper than that. Call Me By Your Name has that relationship. Bones and All is like, let's study a relationship between cannibals. This one is a little more simple in a way, but also complex and strange. Queer follows Daniel Craig, who plays his character Lee, who lives in Mexico City, and he's essentially this guy who's a little bit of a lowlife. He spends his days sort of scouting the local town, trying to find dudes to sleep with. That's pretty much what he does. And to a certain extent, there's a lot of charm in the first part of this movie, following this town and this character as he lives his life in this extremely well put together production of Mexico City. Like, the vibe and the style and the look of this city and this small town is really something wondrous and beautiful, and it really removes you from reality, because it doesn't look like a real place, and I really appreciated that. It almost felt like a Yorgos Lanthimos sort of location, and I think that and the early part of this movie is easily the best part of this movie. Because Lee and Daniel Craig, they eventually meet this character, this dude who sort of perplexes Lee. He's a guy that's not so easy for Lee to get in a certain way. He's a guy that, well, it sweeps Lee off of his feet, right? And you have this complex love story, if you even want to call it a love story, between these 2 characters. Lee, who's this older dude, sort of latching on to something he never thought he would actually find, and this other guy who's a little bit more of a complex character. And it dives itself into these 3 different chapters that study these characters and their relationship, much like any other Luca movie. My main problem with this film is it ends up being a lot flatter, a lot duller, and a lot less engaging than a lot of Luca's other films. I found myself to be very much disconnected from this one. And although there are a lot of aspects of this movie that I really did enjoy, a lot of swings that I thought were really sort of ballsy and I appreciated, and really good performances here, this movie ended up feeling a little bit too long, a little boring in a way, and just maybe my least favorite Luca Guadagnino movie that I've ever seen. First things first, Daniel Craig is incredible here. Is this the Oscar-winning performance that some of us thought it might be earlier in the year? No, I don't think so, but it is very, very different than anything else you've really seen Daniel Craig in. In a weird way, this feels almost like a Kevin Spacey performance. It reminded me a lot of the House of Cards performance, just without the badass presidential aspect, you know what I mean? And Drew Starkey, I think, is the real standout here as Eugene, as the other love interest. He is excellent in this film. This film is broken into 3 parts, and I think part 2 and part 3 tend to be extremely weak when it comes to the story and what the movie's actually doing, especially part 3. It ends up getting really goofy. Part 1 has a vibe to it, this really sort of different vibe than anything I've ever seen from a Luca film in this Mexico City location that I thought was beautiful. And I was really latched on to that cinematic feeling that they sort of built there. And even though a lot of it sort of dragged on a little bit too long in that first part, once it got away from that setting, the movie just got a little strange, a little odd, in a way that I just didn't think matched the overall tone of the first part. The relationship between the 2 characters is believable, and the direction that he goes with that relationship, and sort of the relationship between these characters and how it evolves and disintegrates and re-puts itself back together and just goes about itself throughout the course of this 2-hour runtime. It is fascinating. It's probably the least interesting relationship that Luca's ever put on screen, but it works well enough, and sort of this reverse role of this older dude and this younger guy, and reversing the expectations of what those roles would be, was fascinating. I just think where it goes in the 3rd act, it just fell flat for me, and yet again, I found myself very much disconnected from this, whereas in most Luca films, I'm pretty much locked in from the start. The main problem I usually have with Lucas films, and it's definitely existing here, is the films always tend to go on about 20 minutes too long. There's always a point in his movies where I'm like, if the film ends right here, really good movie, wrap a bow on it. In the case of Challengers, there was a moment where I was like, if the movie ends right here, 5 out of 5, maybe the best movie of the year. And then it went on for 20 more minutes, and it just kind of dulled down the film. It happened with that, it happened with Bones and All, it happens here. This movie, there is a certain point in time where I'm like, if it ends right here, I'll give it a much higher score than I was planning on giving it, but then it just goes on for another 15-20 minutes that I felt that it did not need. The things that are told in that extra 15-20 minutes, that extra drag, I don't think the film needed that. I think the audience could have come to the conclusion the film now shows you in its last 20 minutes without having actually seen it. But that's just my opinion. But I feel that with every single one of his films, that they almost don't want to end. And they need to end sometimes. The ending is very important, obviously, in any movie. So because of all that, this movie just ended up being kind of a forgettable little slump of a movie. It's definitely my least favorite Luca film, and I am a massive fan of him. He's making an American Psycho remake. I can't wait for that. He might be making a film with DC, which could be really interesting. This guy is one of my favorite filmmakers in Hollywood. He's the type of filmmaker that if he's making a movie, I will be seated there day one, no matter what. This, to me, just is a little bit of a stinker. It's just not my favorite. It's probably my least favorite film of his that I've seen. And luckily, he made another film this year that was 10 times better, so we'll be talking about Challengers for the rest of the year, right? Well, not this thing. Overall, I would give Queer a 2 out of 5. It just was not my cup of tea. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think of Queer down below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, hang out with me a little bit longer, check out my other videos. I'll see you in the next one.